LU Japan, because I actually want to war with you. Because Japan would be really easy to take right about now for me. Fuck you. Okay, Japan, and I'm just going to camp out in front of Tokyo. Come on, Japan. It's funny because I actually won the war with them. Honestly, doing a dig slide with the British Navy is not a very good idea currently. They have a lot more ships than I do. Yes, come on. I just want a little war with Japan. Relations. You know, China. If we go to war with Japan, that might be funny. You don't like the Japanese either. Really have that much capital to spend, so I'm just hoping that these finally pay off. Come on, Japan. Yes, I want to improve my relations with them because I finally want to go into war against the Japanese. Uh, okay, can't loop up the Chinese for now. Oh well. Can I say fuck you to Japan? Well, honestly, I'm more interested in. Yay! I can finally say fuck you to Japan. I am more interested in keeping this site peaceful for now. I don't want any of this because I would rather want more ports over here now. Because hey, Lamarlin, hello, Black Iron Barrel. I guess you are new. Hello. I want to go to war with Japan because I would very much like to know what my ships can do. Finally. I'm making. What is this game? Ultimate Admiral Dreadnought. It's basically a naval. It's a basically a naval game where you build ships and then basically go to war against other people. And I'm currently trying to L Japan because I kind of do need to like figure out what my how good my ships are. No, no, not really. That doesn't help me out. Come on. Come on, Japan. I just wanted a little war with you. Just a little. Just a teeny tiny little war. I mean, are you Looper, maybe? The problem is if you're a Looper and okay, so yeah, sorry, but you you keep changing your name. It's if you keep changing your name, I'm not gonna immediately notice it. Come on, come on, Japan. I just wanted a little war. Just want a little war. Plus, I don't have the money to build more ships. This for now. Fine. Um, they're all probably already old. Hmm. Are they building any more ships? Not really currently, but they do have more than me, but oh, they have like uh I do have a new hull design. Let's have a look. What's the new hull design? That's Battleship 3. Um, I mean all of these hulls are kinda ass. Turreted cruiser. Uh, yeah, no. Hey. Nothing really good. No, no, not. We are kinda in the we are kinda in World War I. Yeah, they have combat. Where are we in the timeline? Oh yeah, we had 1891. So I mean, we are like I said, we are in 1891, basically before World War I. So around the time where metal ships came into being, basically more or less, if I remember correctly. I just want to have a little war with you, Japan. I might think of building some more ships. Of Japan. You know what? You move up here. Thank you. Yeah, we are basically around the time where ironclads would basically driving about. Ship design. I might I might want some more armored cruisers. Yeah, build 5 more. And these all goes to Vladivostok, please. I want. I do want a little war with Japan, but currently they are so inconsiderable of, well, not going to war with me. How rude. You know what? You cost me like Vladivostok, Vladivostok, Vladivostok. Not the most amazing time to be in the campaign because not a whole lot of interesting stuff is will happen here. Minus 5 million. Fuck you. This again because can you just please build more transporting capacity? It's annoying. Absolute monarchy. Yeah. Why do Russia's trade relations have to be such a shit show? Fuck you, Japan. Even the I like the money. Oh, I just saw that I would like to change these. Did get a rangefinder. Armor forging. Yeah, thanks. Hull protection. Yeah. Yeah, that's about it for now. But I did see that I'm getting. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, what call torpedo? Yeah, it's more of a mine. But I did see that rangefinders are now retrofit. No, nothing. Armored. I like that. Hey, rangefinder. That's all. Time to refit 2 months. That wouldn't be too fucking. That wouldn't be too long. Um, Are the donation share velocity HE cell. Combat 1. And now you're too fat. Congratulations, you are overweight. Cutting. I'm cutting down. Um, that's interesting. Cool. That that doesn't even fit. Uh, it would be better for spotting. It would also be lighter. Never mind. I can't use that because it doesn't fit. Never mind. Hmm. Yeah, they are real monsters with the cold storage. It's a small upgrade. Lava class 1891. Yep. Uh, then I can give these a little advantage. And yes, this thing. Let's just look at the small specs. Look at how many smoke. Like boys. But at least it has great engine efficiency. Brother is smoke. His brother is just having a smoke. So cursed. I mean, it is called Putin class, so Putin be steaming a lot. Yeah, that's quite accurate. I actually want to look at you. What were you again? Yeah, so many Russian books. Yes. Also, he is armed. Wait a minute. He is armed with a grand total of 28.1 millimeter guns. He's practically armed with like 20 millimeter autocannons all the way around. It is basically just a great line of rifle fire in ship terms. But what can I do? Can I do a little rather for you? Do you have torpedoes? Oh, oh, oh yeah, you do have torpedoes. To be fair, kinda useless. Let's remove that. Oi, put that back. Yeah, I'm just getting rid of the torpedoes. They are kind of kind of useless. Drops the weight by a bit. Can you get a range runner? Yes, you can. Okay, cool. Gun cotton. 2 months retrofit. That's not too horrendous. Engine efficiency, we don't believe in that. What are you? Small? I don't think I can fit the. Yeah, no, 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 I cannot fit a bigger one. That's the issue. Okay. Um, uh, What year was the ship? Which ship? This one? This one was. I think these were all designed. Wait a minute, give me a moment. These, yeah, 90, 80, 90 basically. The Putin. Um, funnily enough, the Putin is. If you haven't looked at the hull, it's a tumble home design actually. Funnily enough, this design of like ship hull, you mostly or well only find this in like French designs, the tumble home, where the ship is basically wider at the bottom and thinner as it goes up. This is a usual French ship design actually. Did I just saved? Exit to menu. Ship design. And no, no, no. Russia, no. United States, no. God damn it, I want France. There we go. The baguette. Super baguette. But yeah. Um, but yeah, as you can see, I don't want to see that. This tumble home design, you usually find these with like France. Even the battleship is just a beefier version, basically. But these holds are horrendously shit. Problem basically comes down to them super baguette, yes. Yeah, but still these holds are just kinda ass. The reason being is that these are not very good at like going anywhere. Yeah. Also, France had a very funny idea of putting a lot of turrets on its ships that have all different calibers. Fun, because yes, that's easy to navigate. Who the fuck is shooting now? I can load up my old Germany one. French. Honestly, the ships for the French that the AI sometimes build get up to wacky stuff. It's not go. Since it's taking forever to load, and since there's not a lot, I am thinking of basically just putting on some naval, some naval video in the background for everyone to watch, since like there's not a whole lot of interesting stuff happening here. Moment. I would very much like it if videos wouldn't just automatically start. Thank you. Um, uh, yeah, the machine that. There we go. So as I'm just putting on a video of him, please also visit the original creator of this video. His name is Rafim Fadden. If you're interested in naval history, he's basically a good channel to watch. So let me just go. Big please, thank you. Go. As we are playing a naval game about basically a game about building ships and going to war, this might be a good idea to have running next to it. I might I might need to put that over here. Give me a moment.
Well, today is the first special video of the month, and that means it's a subject that's been chosen by the patrons on Patreon. I must have really done something to irritate them this time, because their chosen subject is the developmental history of French free dreadnoughts. Whatever I did, I promise I will try and make it up to you. But never mind. You have asked, and therefore you shall receive. So, the French Navy in the latter part of the 19th century was a fairly interesting and diverse bunch, to say the least. They had, of course, kick-started the ironclad warship revolution with La Gloire. They'd then gone in a number of rather interesting directions when it came to ironclad warship design, including trying to make a ship-of-the-line Age of Sail style, except with iron, in the shape of this rather wonderful ship and its sister, that's Solferino and Magenta.
A
They
lot.
then moved on, as had everybody else, to central battery ironclads, and from there to the open barbette ship, which was a precursor of the pre-dreadnought. As you might notice from these photos, a tendency towards the tumble home design of warship had begun to influence French armoured warship construction pretty early in its gestation, and this would express itself quite considerably during much of the pre-dreadnought era as well. The idea of tumble home design was to allow the ships to be more seaworthy, as by narrowing the hull quite considerably the further up you went, you, in theory, would reduce the amount of top weight, and therefore you could make the ship with a much higher freeboard than you could in a more conventional slab-sided or flared design. This, in turn, meant that you could mount the guns higher, and of course, being mounted much higher, they were kept clear of the sea in considerably higher sea states. This was all very well, and tumble home warships proved very adept at navigating narrow passageways such as canals and locks. However, they did have one rather unfortunate side effect, which was that their margin of stability when the ships began to flood through combat damage was minimal to non existent, as would be borne out in combat later down the line. But that's a story for another time. So now you know briefly what tumble home design is. Let's look into the start of the French pre-dreadnoughts. The last French ships to be built before the first French pre-dreadnought were, at least in terms of capital ships, the Marceau class, consisting, logically enough, of the Marceau, the Magenta, and the Neptune. However, this class was started in 1880, and after this, due to a change of
Just real quick, this is some of my ships I've built at Germany. This is the Tiger Queen. My ship philosophy with like battleships with Germany was there's basically the Dragon Princess, the Dragon Warrior, then there's the Tiger Queen, and there's the Tiger King. And the Tiger Queen is basically a battleship hunter. She is just the heaviest guns, and the Tiger King is basically her escort. Smaller but still big guns, but faster firing.
thinking temporarily to the Jeune École, which was, as has been discussed in other videos, a school of thinking that held that submarines, torpedo boats, and other light warships such as cruisers could bring an enemy to their knees via commerce raiding and lightning attacks. The French Navy didn't actually start on any further capital ships for approximately 10 years, with the Charles Martel class being cancelled midway through the 1880s as a result of the new naval administration with their new ideas. However, by the beginning of the 1890s, the Jeune École was beginning to weaken its stranglehold on French naval thinking, and of course, there was another rather large elephant in the room in the form of the 1889 Naval Defence Act passed in the British Parliament. You see, up until this point, British battleships of various sorts had been manufactured in ones and twos, in odds and ends, and weird designs aplenty. However, this particular Defence Act rather pulled the rug out of that little paradigm of operations by demanding a lot of battleships. It ordered over the next 5 years 8 first-class battleships and 2 second-class battleships, mainly designed for operations in the Pacific, where they were designed to hunt down armored cruisers. Now, an entire mass class of battleships, this was something that the French needed to respond to, and they needed to respond to quickly. The cancelled Charles Martel class were revisited, and one of the ships, the Brennus, named after a Gaulish chieftain who would have the distinction of being the last person to sack Rome for quite a few hundred years, and also the originator of those immortal words Vae Victis, or Woe to the Vanquished, would be redesigned in response to the Royal Navy's new class of ship, which would become the Royal Sovereign class. Using some of the materials left over from the first iteration of the ship and on the same slipway, the new Brennus began construction. This ship would be armed with quite the variety of armament, with a main battery of 13.4-inch or 340mm guns. However, there were only 3 of these, in a twin turret forward and a single turret aft. A secondary battery of 164mm or 6.4-inch guns was arranged in a variety of casemates and single turrets on 2 different levels on either side of the ship. You then had a tertiary battery of 4 65mm or 2.6-inch guns, a quaternary battery of 14 47mm or 1.9-inch guns, a quintenary battery of 8 37mm guns, and 4 18-inch torpedo tubes, just for good measure. The ram bow was deleted, steel armour was brought in instead of iron, and new Belleville boilers were also introduced. This gave the ship a speed of 18 knots with a total indicated horsepower of 13,900 running on two shafts, and a shallow main armour belt 18 inches thick, with 18-inch armour on the main turrets as well. One of the other problems with a tumble home design was it meant there was relatively little space in the hull for such things as accommodation, and so the ship completed with a massive superstructure. This, as well as various inefficiencies in the yard, meant that the ship was, shall we say, a little bit overweight. When she went out on trials, this is bearing in mind on trials, so she's not at full displacement yet, the draft was already over a foot more than it should have been, which, combined with the relatively shallow belt, meant that the vast majority of the ship's armour protection was now below the water. This only got worse once the ship was fully stocked and loaded for war, and would eventually require a reconstruction in order to prevent her from gaining so much instability that she would just possibly roll over at random. Nevertheless, one hastily redesigned, rather unstable semi-pre-dreadnought was not exactly the world's best response to a navy that was producing an entire fleet of brand new battleships, and so the French needed a much bigger and better response than just the poor old Brennus. And so now, faced with the very real possibility that the Royal Sovereign class might allow the Royal Navy to dominate the Mediterranean completely uncontested, the French responded with a rather sweeping and ambitious law, the Statute Naval of 1890, which called for a squadron of 24
Oh, you're still here.
first-class
Don't worry.
battleships, a coastal defence fleet of 17 coastal defence battleships, and showing that the Jeu Nicole hadn't quite lost its grip, 220 torpedo boats, as well as an overseas fleet of 34 cruisers. However, whilst the Royal Navy's programme, with the exception of HMS Hood, which was a throwback to the old school of turret design, would produce battleships of the same class and therefore generally uniform capability, the French programme called for an initial tranche of 4 battleships to be laid down, but right from the start, these were never going to be the same, with invitations to tender going out, with 4 separate contracts for 4 separate ships promised to 4 separate winners. The key parameters were displacement, armament, thickness of the armour belt, and the armour on the main turrets, but otherwise, everything else was up to the designers. They could decide what those hulls'
Hey,
overall
Kate.
dimensions were
Hello.
going to be, what the hull form was going to be, what it was going to look like in silhouette, where the medium secondary guns were going to be, how much power and where the machinery was going to be placed, what kind of protection system they were going to use. And bear in mind, this is just after the Italians were looking at a completely unarmoured battleship. So, yes, it was, shall we say, a rather interesting design competition. And this competition would actually end up with 5 ships rather than 4, just to give you some idea of the flavour of how different these 5 ships would actually end up being. One of them would have a secondary battery in twin turrets, whilst all the others had the secondary battery in singles. 3 ships had 2 engines driving 2 propeller shafts, whilst the other 2 had 3 engines driving 3 propeller shafts. Load for displacement varied between 11,800 and 12,200 tons. Length varied by up to 10 metres and horsepower by up to 2,000. Collectively, even the French would term this little batch of ships the flotte d'échantillon, or fleet of samples, or patchwork fleet. These ships would consist of the Charles Martel, which was reusing the name of the other ship that had been cancelled in the mid-1880s, the Carnot, the Messena, the Bouvet, and the Jauriguiberi, I think. Possibly, maybe. As the designs progressed, great concern was expressed as the displacement seemed to be going up and up and up, and with the problems encountered by Brennus so close in mind, permission was given to consider replacement of the 340mm gun with a new 305mm gun. At the time, the French had quite the variety of calibers when it came to their main battery weapons, and they rather liked the 274mm or 10.8-inch gun. The new 305mm under development was supposed to be able to penetrate about the same amount of armor as the 274mm gun, but at twice the range. The weight of the 305mm gun would obviously be considerably less than a 340, and so approval was given to swap the main armament from the 340 down to the 305. Now, if you thought Brennus's main armament was eclectic, Charles Martel takes the cake, the biscuit, and quite probably the container as well. Its main armament consisted of two single 305mm guns, two single 274mm guns in a secondary battery, a tertiary battery of 8 138mm guns, again in single mounts, various variety of casements and turrets, a quaternary battery of 8 65mm guns, all singles, a quintenary battery of 12 47mm guns, again all singles, and a sextenary battery of 8 37mm guns, again all in singles, plus 4 torpedo tube launchers, because of course it did. Speed was 17 to 18 knots, and main armour was between 12 and 18 inches thick, with a slightly expanded power plant of 13,500 horsepower driving two shafts compared to Brennus. Whilst this bizarre and eclectic main armament might seem a little bit ineffective, and indeed it gave a weight of broadside that was almost a ton less than that of the Royal Sovereigns, it did have one advantage in that the lighter 305 and 274mm guns had a theoretical rate of fire about twice that of the 13.5-inch guns on the Royal Sovereigns, which meant that in theory you could hit an enemy with more shells, even if those shells were perhaps somewhat less effective. Now, you might be thinking, well, hang on a minute, 18 inches of armour, that's quite a substantial bit of protection, especially for an early pre-dreadnought. And yes, on paper you'd be correct. However, there are two factors to consider. One is the fact that this is not, in fact, the Krupp steel that you would expect to find on a World War I or World War II dreadnought battleship, or even on a later pre-dreadnought. It is, in fact, a Le Creusot variant of Harvey nickel steel, and so its overall resistive power is somewhat less than what we
Oh
normally
shit, I
think
went to
of
war
in
with
terms of
Japan.
battleship armament. And secondly, as
Finally.
mentioned with the Brennus, the French armour belt layout tended to be very shallow. Exactly how these early French pre-dreadnoughts were protected is best explained by the diagram shown above at the moment. But effectively, the main belt protection for the ship's hull was completely separate from the main battery protection much higher up in the ship, with a relatively thin upper belt and an armoured deck that was designed primarily to deflect and break up incoming shells that were hitting above the magazine and coal bunker levels, with the main belt being a very narrow strip that was just designed to protect the waterline of the ship, with the coal bunkers behind providing additional protection. Whilst Brennus had something of a tumble home, the Charles Martel went all in with it, in part to give the secondary and tertiary batteries better firing arcs, considering their variety of turrets and casemates mounted all down the sides. Carnot was the next ship in line, and as you can see, it looked completely different on terms of superstructure, although the main armament was roughly the same. It did also, however, possess slightly better armour protection, with thicker and slightly taller secondary armour protection and armour decks in various places throughout the ship, which led to the ship being slightly slower at just over 17 knots, despite having a slightly greater power plant. The sheer number of openings in the hull, also known as scuttles, drew a fair bit of criticism, albeit that it did kind of look like a return
I'm doing alright,
to
Kate,
the
thank you.
age
How
of
are you doing?
sail, since one could easily imagine lots of cannons sticking out of this ship, as I'm sure you can probably think now. Jauriguiberi went completely the other way, with a relatively minimal superstructure. However, the ship was physically shorter and wider than the other two half-sisters that we've looked at so far, and was one of the ships that went in with twin mountings for the tertiary armament, as opposed to the singles present on the other ships. It also appeared to steal its funnels from a factory, rather than the somewhat slimmer units found on Carnot and Charles Martel, and as a result looked completely different again. And now we move on from the least pronounceable to the most visually offensive, the Messena, which appeared to take the basic hull of a torpedo ram and attach a hotel block to the top somewhat, with the 65mm guns present in the previous 3 ships being swapped for 100mm or 3.9-inch weapons, which were intended to supplement the 138mm or 5.5-inch tertiary battery, which just would result in a lot of confused splashes, to be perfectly honest, in an actual fight. She would, however, introduce 3-shaft propulsion, which would remain a fairly constant feature of French pre-dreadnoughts going forwards, but, like Brennus, would complete massively overweight and was otherwise generally regarded as something of a failure in this 5-ship category. And finally, we have the least visually offensive of the 5 ships, the Bouvet, which still had the tumble home, but significantly fewer scuttles, a much reduced superstructure, but also a much more built-up stern area. She also mounted a slightly experimental version of the 305mm gun, which meant that her firepower characteristics were subtly different to the other 4. As with Messina, she substituted 100mm guns for the 65mm guns of the first 3 ships. In the late 19th century, the French Navy was actually close to the forefront of fire control technology, and so various rangefinders and fire control systems of surprising complexity could be found aboard all 5 ships to varying degrees, as you can see in the pictures appearing above. However, this was slightly complicated by the fact that each turret was given its own fire control system, so on most of these ships that meant a total of 16 separate fire control sections just for the turrets, and then the light anti-torpedo boat weaponry was further divided into 5 overall sections, which corresponded roughly to sections of the ship, such as foremast platform, mainmast platform, upper bridge, shelter deck amidships, and aft superstructure. Advances in Le Creusot's ability to produce nickel-steel armour also meant that by the time you got to Bouvet, the armour protection was narrowed to 400mm on the basis that this provided exactly the same physical protection due to the advances in the steel manufacturing, whilst obviously saving a significant amount of displacement. She was also much more heavily electrified than the other ships of this loose collection, with a number of electrical generators and lots of electrical equipment installed, along with other changes such as other variants to armour thickness in places like the ship's barbettes. This meant that Bouvet underwent quite a number of modifications while she was still under construction, partly to try and save weight as a result of other modifications that were being made, and partly because various new ideas were being trialled. As a result, she would come out with a relatively marginal level of stability and buoyancy, which would be evidenced later on in her loss during World War I. Unfortunately, this cavalcade of rather interesting and very varying ships did not help French naval matters very much, as by the time, thanks to all the delays and infighting, that these ships were all commissioned and in service, they didn't just have to worry about the Royal Sovereigns, they also had to worry about the 9-strong Majestic class, which are generally considered to be the origin of the classic pre-dreadnought battleship. So the Royal Navy was now rolling around with 7 Royal Sovereigns, 9 Majestics, plus the Royal Sovereign Charles Hood, and the French had 5 rather heterogeneous vessels armed with anything between 5 and 6 different types of guns, of which 4 could be expected to be firing at battle range, thus without, despite their relatively advanced fire control systems, spotting the different shell splashes between those main, secondary, tertiary and quaternary batteries was going to be a rather interesting challenge, to say the least. Louis-Émile Bertin, who was tasked with being Director of Naval Construction in the late 1890s, would describe them as chavaribal, reliable and naturally they belong in communication. However, and they were capable of a fairly high speed for period, at least when they were new out of the dockyard. They were, however, very compact, very limited in capability as a result of this, and really resembled more of fortress or hotel block armed with numerous different types of guns, as opposed to the Royal Sovereigns and Majestics, which actually managed to look the part of a seagoing battleship. And if that sounds harsh, that's the French Navy's own evaluation of them. As the mid-1890s rolled around, the French Navy tried to resolve some of these issues by aiming for a much
Yeah.
more homogeneous class of pre-dreadnought battleships. Unfortunately, thanks to various political shenanigans, they were told that they would have to come up with a new generation of improved battleships, but on a lesser displacement. In order to do this, they initially considered bringing the two 305mm guns into a twin turret forward and the two 274mm guns into a twin turret aft, but luckily saner heads prevailed and the ships would be armed with four 305mm or 12-inch guns in two twin turrets, one fore and one aft, which made them look considerably more conventional. They would, however, still have a very bulbous stuck-out bow, raking back quite significantly, and of course would maintain the tumble home found on previous French pre-dreadnoughts, which we've already discussed. The rest of the armament, you'll be happy to know, was not quite as complex as on the Charles Martels, with a secondary battery of 10 single 138mm or 5.5-inch guns, then 8 single 100mm guns, similar to Bouvet and Messina, and these made up the tertiary battery, followed by a quaternary battery of 20 single 47mm guns. And that was it, apart from, of course, 4 torpedo tubes. The three ships of the class would be Charlemagne, Saint-Louis, and Gallois. As mounting a pair of heavy twin turrets so high up in the ship as allowed for by the freeboard of the tumble-home design would give the ship significant stability issues if the approach found in the Charles Martels was followed elsewhere, the rest of the ship's armament would be displaced to casement mounts or open deck mounts, depending on the calibre of the gun. That isn't to say that the slightly more crazy French designers didn't try and get their act in. They did, and a number of design submissions for this class were rejected, which included the mounting of the secondary battery turrets whilst moving the primary batteries into open barbettes again for some bizarre reason. The three ships would incorporate many of the advancements found in Messina, but as these were designed in from the start, they were actually included in a far more sensible manner, which meant that the ships were at somewhat less risk of completing dramatically overweight and in a completely random fashion. Nevertheless, despite being a much more closely related class, there were still significant differences, with Saint-Louis having a completely different turret manufacturer with completely different turret design compared to Charlemagne and Gallois, which had rather complicated maintenance issues. The belt armour was once again manufactured by the French versions of Harvey nickel steel, but it was still homogeneous armour, not base hardened, and therefore retained its 400mm or 18-inch thickness. Speed for the class would be roughly 17 knots, but again in a wonderfully French manner. There were differences between the ships when it came to propulsion. The propeller diameter was 4 metres in Charlemagne, 4.3 metres in Gallois, and 4.3 metres on the wing propellers and 4.1 metres on the centre propeller in Saint-Louis, which of course meant slightly different propulsion characteristics for each of the ships. The Charlemagnes were a significant advance on the Charles Martels, most of the last one, the Bouvet, and proved to be fairly stable gunnery boats. However, they were fairly terrible at seakeeping. This isn't necessarily a flaw of the design, it's simply because the French were trying to cram as much or more as they had into Bouvet onto a smaller ship. With an increase in displacement, most of these issues would probably have been solved, and the ships would have been much more successful in service. Nevertheless, they did represent a significant increase in French combat power over the Bouvet, partly because of the various technological advances, but also because, despite their differences, they were a lot closer together in terms of relative capability than any two of the Charles Martels, which meant that there was a hope that you could actually operate them as a single unified squadron. Next, technically speaking, would come the Henri IV, a just under 9,000-ton pre-dreadnought battleship, I say battleship in quotation marks, because it really doesn't match the rest of the French design lineage, and it's only armed with a pair of 274mm guns as its main armament, which makes it less well armed than some armoured cruisers, and even the German coastal defence pre-dreadnoughts are significantly outgun it. So I think it's best to leave that ship to one side and look at it as its own separate unit at some point in the future. Having recognised their mistake in limiting the Charlemagne class to 11,000 tons or thereabouts, the next ship to be ordered, the battleship Iena, would be allowed to have an increased displacement of up to 12,000 tons and designed, but this came with a number of stipulations and drivers. Speed was to come back up to 18 knots, range was to be significantly increased to allow for better operational capabilities, and armour was to be increased in all sorts of areas, as the thinning of armour that had started as a trend in Messina and Beauvais was not seen as particularly desirable, given the slight problem of enemy guns caring that much about your design constraints. It was also proposed to upgrade the secondary battery from 138mm to 164mm guns, but this would have come at the expense of deleting one of the main guns, which would have led to a Brenner-style 2 forward, 1 aft arrangement when it came to firepower. The designer, Monsieur Thibaudier, luckily came up with a fairly good solution. He would use a higher grade of armour steel to allow for, again, similar protection but with less thickness, thus preserving weight, and he would reduce the 138mm battery by 2 guns and upgrade the remaining secondary battery to 164mm weapons, which would in turn allow him to retain the 2 twin turrets of 305mm or 12-inch guns for the main armament. As a result, the total armament of the Iena would consist of 4 305mm guns in 2 twin turrets, 8 single 164mm or 6.5-inch guns, 8 single 100mm guns, 16 single 47mm guns, and of course the obligatory 4 torpedo tubes. The main guns were also a modified version with a much larger firing chamber that allowed the use of a considerably more powerful gun charge, which gave the 305mm gun extended range and armour penetration capabilities as compared to the previous ships. Although the size and bulk of the superstructure was creeping up again after Bouvet's valiant attempts to reduce it, the ship was also protected by Harvey nickel steel that was now cemented and face hardened, which meant that the overall thickness of the armour could be reduced quite considerably to 320mm at its thickest point, or 12.6 inches, which obviously saved a considerable amount of weight. In addition to Thibaudier's decision to simply use a higher grade of steel in the first place. Overall, Iena could be considered quite a success, especially compared to its predecessors. It was relatively fast, fairly manoeuvrable, it was a fairly good gun platform, and the only real criticism of it was that the fire control systems found it difficult to maintain a solution above 16 and a bit knots. But that wasn't exactly a massive mark against the ship, considering the many and varied issues of the previous designs. There were still issues with having multiple gun types in terms of having a primary, secondary and tertiary battery that would all try to engage at long range, and the guns were perhaps too close together when it came to the secondary and tertiary weapons. Additionally, the conning tower was held to be fairly small and cramped, even though this was where French ships were supposed to be commanded from. But on the other hand, the bridge was very well laid out and received quite favourably in peacetime operations and cruising operations by the various commanders who served aboard her. So overall, despite a few flaws which every ship has, Iena was a very good example of French pre-dreadnought design. Next came Suffren, or Suffren, which was supposed to be a modified version of Iena. However, As the various demands of the French Naval Construction Board came in, it would eventually end up being an almost entirely new design. One of the most notable visual differences was the fact that the secondary battery of 164mm guns was now split in a return to a much older design criteria, with single turrets and casement mounts ranged along the sides. As her dimensions were larger than Iena, who in turn had been larger than the Charlemagne's, the slipway that she was to be constructed on needed extension first before she could be started. The belt armour was also thinned by 20mm to 300mm, or 11.8 inches. However, it covered more area at this thickness than the tapering belt of Iena. The pronounced tumbling of earlier ship designs was also gradually disappearing at this time. Although it was still present visibly on French warships, it posed something of a reduced risk to stability during combat conditions as compared to something like the Charlemagne class. Whilst
Oh,
Sophian
the
did
one went away.
represent
Oops,
a
didn't notice that.
improvement in combat capability over Iena, in the French Navy's own evaluation, they saw a return to the same kind of principles that had governed the Flotte de Chantillon right at the beginning of their pre-dreadnought efforts, since, as opposed to the Charlemagne's, they now ended up with 2 additional ships of considerably different design. They're also looking across the pond, or across the channel, I should say, to the British, as during the same period of 1893 to 1901, the Royal Navy had received 29 first-class battleships, all with a uniform armament of 4 12-inch guns and 12 6-inch guns on the secondaries in 5 different classes. During the same period, however, the incremental and scattered efforts of the French Navy had only produced 6 ships, of which only 3 were to the same design. They attempted, therefore, to get things back on track with the Patrie class. This, at a total of 6 ships, would be the largest class of French battleships ordered since the Flandre class of ironclads early in the iron and steam era. These ships would represent a major step forward in French battleship design, in part due to the fact they were designed as a single class supposed to be built on separate plans, but also because they were significantly larger and therefore would be more capable than all previous French pre-dreadnoughts, which had been very much built to a budget. With these ships displacing just under 15,000 tons, they would be considered equal to any number of other pre-dreadnought classes then in the early 1900s, and this was thanks mainly to 2 factors. Firstly, the naval laws of Germany were beginning the wind-up of the German fleet to the scale that it would reach in World War I with the High Seas Fleet, thanks to Admiral von Tirpitz, which worried the French somewhat immensely. And also, it must be said, due to the efforts of Émile Bertin, who had, as we mentioned previously, finally managed to get himself appointed as the Director of Naval Construction, and had at last managed to batter the French naval boards into submission and convince them that no, you could not build smaller ships and rely on élan to defeat a much larger and numerically superior opponent. You actually have to build ships on a par with your enemies, or potential enemies, should we say, were building. And so we have the Patries. After an awful lot of toing and froing on the design front, these ships would be completed with a top speed of 18 knots, courtesy of 17,500 horsepower, a main belt of 11 inches thickness, or 280 millimeters, again of cemented Harvey nickel steel, which was face hardened, and the belt was beginning to increase towards a more recognizable belt, armored deck and cellular backing system as seen in many other pre-dreadnoughts, as opposed to the somewhat eccentric previous extreme tumble home narrow belt French designs of previous vessels. The main armament was also now beginning to approach something more rational, with 4 305mm guns in twin turrets, and the tertiary battery of 100mm guns taken entirely in favour of a much larger secondary battery of 164mm guns, with a total of 18 weapons mounted in 6 twin turrets and 6 single casements, with 24 47mm anti-torpedo boat guns, although these were very definitely not intended for engaging enemy capital ships with, and a reduction in torpedo tubes from 4 to 2. One of the early design proposals was to have the twin turrets equipped with 194mm guns, for a total of 12, backed up by 10 unshielded 100mm quick-firing guns, but this was rejected in favour of the uniform 164mm battery. The 6 ships were of course to be Patrie, République, Démocratie, Justice, Liberté, and Vérité. Despite predating the Invincible class of battle cruisers by almost half a decade, these ships were fully capable of having electrically powered turret training and
Alright,
elevation mechanisms
bye.
without putting on something of a lightning show for everybody in the vicinity. However, despite this promising start in uniform construction, the changes inevitably would
Thanks.
start to come in. One of them being the decree that all of the hull mounted 47mm guns had to be replaced by 65mm guns, with 16 47s going in favour of 13 65s, because it was felt that torpedo boats were getting slightly too large and the 47mm wouldn't be quite as capable of stopping them as it had originally been considered. And then, of course, the British put their latest class of pre-dreadnought battleships into production, the King Edward VII, and whilst these ships still had 12-inch main guns and a secondary battery of 6-inch guns, this battery was actually now more broadly considered a tertiary battery, as the ships also included 4 9.2-inch or 234mm guns in turrets along with the 6-inch guns, forming a somewhat heavier broadside than everybody else had anticipated. The French, who of course had decided on the 164mm turrets and casemates on the basis that they didn't need anything larger, were now somewhat taken aback. With the first 2 ships, it was too late to do anything, but with the last 4, starting with Démocratie, it was possible to make some changes before the ship was finalised. As a result, the 194mm gun was brought back into consideration, and the casement-mounted 164mm guns were replaced by 4 casement-mounted 194mm guns, whilst the twin 164mm turrets were replaced by single 194mm turrets, resulting in a total secondary battery of 10 194mm guns in the 6 single turrets and 4 casement mounts. As this overall led to a slight reduction in ship's displacement, the weight was put into thicker armour on the casemates and turrets, reflecting the higher status of the 194mm gun. However, these changes put the ship's construction back by 12 months, which meant that although the ships were generally...
But this is all I can stream for today because I have to get ready for work. Bye everyone, thanks for watching this short little stream.